They basically apply that for everyday transportation modes, such as driving, walking, taking the bus, train, cycling as well. So it's a really exhaustive approach and a different change for transportation, because the current mode for transportation that we approach is, all right, what's the value of a human life? We calculate that. We try and figure out, okay, how many car crashes are we having here? If it's too many, then we start to consider, well, maybe we should do something because we're losing money at this point. But with Vision Zero concept, value of life is limitless. And what we try and do is make sure that no one dies while we're having transportation, regardless of the mode. And so, again, it affects motorists just as much as it affects pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users. So it's definitely something that, it's a pretty big concept. It started off in Sweden, I want to say back in 1993. You can look that up. I remember at least it's in that ballpark at the time for it. And Sweden's had a really significant success for this. Other cities around the world have also adopted Vision Zero to equally decent acclaim as well. And some of the big issues though is that with Vision Zero, it really depends on how that city approaches it. So for instance, some Vision Zero programs in some cities, they'll be like, hey, wear a high-vis vest when you go out in town. That way if you walk into the crosswalk, people will see you and they kill you. And it's just this whole different thing, whereas more effective Vision Zero programs are usually like, all right, well, we know people are crossing here and they're getting hit. We need to slow vehicle traffic down so that if there is a collision, it's not at fatal speeds, they'll lower the speed limit, they'll raise the crosswalk so that if the car does have to pass through, it's not a collision that happens as a result. And it's much more exhaustive and intensive than that. So in a general ballpark, that's kind of what Vision Zero is we're trying to approach transportation systems so that there's zero fatalities whatsoever. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, yeah.
Is there like an actual document or a plan or something? Or is this just something that someone's currently just talking about?
Each city has different plans.
Yeah.
Does Charlotte have one?
I think my firm is actually currently.
So Charlotte DOT does have its own Vision Zero department and plan. I think probably one of the main things is that it also features in the strategic mobility plan. Angela Berry is in charge of the Vision Zero department as well. To her credit, she's really good at what she does, and she does try and help these items out and move along. One of the big issues though is that oftentimes with these various transportation departments, they're either going to clash against themselves, Charlotte DOT, or they're going to clash against North Carolina DOT. And what will essentially happen is we'll identify what's called a high injury network. High Injury Network, HIN. You can see it in the Strategic Mobility Plan. It's this big map, and the red parts are more or less where most of the crashes happen and most of the fatalities happen. And you can change it for cars, you can change it for pedestrians, cyclists, so on and so forth, and you more or less can see which areas are hotspots. The city already knows which areas are problematic and which areas are experiencing frequent crashes and injuries and fatalities, unfortunately. The biggest thing though is that oftentimes we run into this issue with some traffic engineers and some roadway engineers where they'll say, we can't install this because then it'll reduce the through capacity of motor vehicles. And that is the biggest thing. The Plaza Midwood stroll and roll bike lane. Who's familiar with that? Yeah. Okay. So it's a pretty cool little spot. It was more or less Renee Bradley's idea to kind of help get the thing set up, initiated. She is just, an active citizen like ourselves. She was trying to get the whole thing set up, and she kept encountering wave against wave against wave of some Charlotte DOT engineers and some other engineers basically saying, hey, you can't do this. This is a fairly high volume traffic area. If you do this, you're going to reduce the capacity for motor vehicles. This is the issue that we have ourselves within Charlotte DOT. Within North Carolina DOT, it's much more exacerbated, especially because North Carolina DOT is barred from law from spending funding on only pedestrian or bicycle programs. So they just can't do it. It has to be included in some of these other items, which is why you'll have stuff that's kind of ridiculous, like, okay, we're going to widen this to 6 lanes to basically a highway, but there'll be a sidewalk next to it. Who feels comfortable walking next to a highway? The majority of us most likely aren't. And the reality is that when a crash does happen alongside that and you're walking alongside it on the sidewalk, you can still get caught and hit in the resulting carnage of it. That's more or less what happened to Al Gorman, which I don't know if you guys are familiar, but he was hit and killed in, 2015, I want to say? Yeah, so Al Gorman, he was a very notable character in 2015. quote me on that. It might be 2013, but it's one of those 2 years. He's riding his bike on the sidewalk. Wasn't even in the intersection whatsoever. A car crash resulted in him getting hit and killed while on the sidewalk. They put up a ghost bike in honor of him. And within the same month that the ghost bike was installed, another car crash comes and destroys the ghost bike as well, which is also on the sidewalk. And so that really kind of called into some questions about, all right, well, we know that these two modes of transportation don't really work, and it's also an indicator that the cars are traveling at too high of a speed. We need to do something to slow it down. And that same intersection now, you can go, there's a whole row of flexi-post bike lanes there now to kind of slow down the traffic as a result of it.
Where's that?
Flexi-post bike lanes?
No, I mean, where's the exit?
I want to say it was Park Road. Parkwood Road, yeah. Yeah.
Not far from here.
Yeah, not far from here at all, and you can go there today and see it. The ghost bike is no longer there, unfortunately, so it's definitely something to kind of consider. But again, I think probably the biggest thing is that there are a couple of tactics that we can do as a community if we're wanting to kind of make our streets safer, just on a quote-unquote tactical urbanism level. But there's also stuff that we can do to push our local officials and our department agencies to making these better decisions so that we're not having to wait until someone dies to have these meetings and push for some change as a result of it. So, does anyone have any thoughts, questions, items? I just want to know what you guys have like on your mind right now at this point, because it is certainly a relevant topic, and I want to help air the discussion on that as well.
I guess one thing that kind of comes to mind is just that, and it's just probably more of like a big location, but just like a lot of some of the worst spots that I've seen are places where you have like sidewalks that effectively sort of end at like highway interchanges and things like that on some of these major roads. A lot of our arterials like effectively do have like actual interchanges at some point or another. On the freeways. And in a lot of these spots where it's like an underpass or like a interchange, they just don't have the fucking involved at all.
Yeah.
So at that point, it's like, it's not even necessarily like a flow over pedestrian, it's just like, this is only flow. Like there's nothing else. Like it is effectively. So you have these situations where you have somebody who's like, okay, they're trying to go from point A to point B. Even if that sidewalk on either side isn't necessarily that safe, you're basically going point A, reaching a point where there is physically no safe way to cross.
Yeah.
Having to like jet across somehow and get to the other side.
And you know, that's something to highlight too. We'll get to you in a quick moment, but even North Carolina DOT recognizes that just having the sidewalk alongside the roadway does reduce the chance of fatalities by 65 to 83%, depending on which municipality you're in. So just having that as well. The city is trying to address that with the sidewalk bonds. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get to one of my areas, but I petitioned them to create a sidewalk. But if you are not on the first priority portion of it, because you're trying to get as many people taken care of in the high-end network, they're working on the second and third bond until hopefully the entire city gets coverage. So you won't see full coverage in 2 years or 4, maybe 6 or 8. And that can be discouraging to hear, but also at the same time, I'm trying to think of it generationally. You know, I might not be able to enjoy the benefits, but at least my daughter will when she grows up. You got a point?
Yeah, I guess the thing that I find quite frustrating is that a lot of the issues that people bring up are very anecdotal, and there's not really, so it's like, yes, at this street it seems terrible, and at this intersection it's very terrible, but there's not really any sort of systematic way of quantifying that or demonstrating like where we need to start to make safer, which intersections to start with to make safer intersections. And so I know that like the city has those like little sensors and stuff that they have on the ground, but they seem to be really like few and far between, and I don't know if they actually capture bicycle data as well. And I don't know if there's like a way, I mean that's kind of like somewhat of a cheap thing to implement, and I don't know if there's like a way for them to share that kind of data that we could analyze, like where are the bicycles moving through, or and does that correlate with any type of increase in accidents or anything like that? So like this is where we actually need to.
No, that's a really good point, actually. I do know the city does have like data in terms of where the crashes are happening. They will occasionally draw the sensors to figure out where are people using the bike lane. They do that for the rail trail, I think, pretty extensively. The 7th Street cycle track, they did that as well.
Does the city not have a long-range transportation plan?
The city does have a long-range transportation plan. The strategic mobility plan was the visionary portion of it. The Charlotte 2040 plan is the main thing of it. The whole reason this 10 more controversy has happened is because in order to accomplish that plan, we need to be able to approve our own sales tax for the city. And more or less, Tim Moore has shot that down, meaning, okay, well, it's not likely to happen. And the city might get funding, but instead of being able to have that funding for alternative modes of transportation, which we see are safer than driving on city, or even Vision Zero initiatives, it's more or less just going to go to roadway expansion and widening, which is why it's such a contentious item as well. So the city has a plan. Charlotte DOT, to their credit, has done a lot of work trying to implement that piecemeal. But we also need to remember they're working with very limited funding resources and also trying to balance different priorities. So it's certainly an item that's kind of on the schedule. I think probably the biggest thing that we could do currently if this whole Tim Moore situation doesn't resolve itself, because I know that Mayor Lyles, she's trying to talk to him at this point, and trying to make some common ground, so he's like, hey, no, like, you can do good things with this, we're trying to make this happen. If it doesn't go through, well, there's certainly items that we can report on this as well, but I think probably the biggest thing is that just attending something as small as the budget hearing when it comes time for it, and really honing in on those details, you can really do a lot for it. My friend Josh Benner and I, we went to the budget hearing 2 or 3 times this fiscal year. We kept harassing them constantly about bicycle funding, sidewalk funding, and also the Vision Zero program funding. It was just one of those things where Vision Zero was at like $1 million for the initial proposals, bicycle funding was at $2 million, and sidewalks, I think it was at like maybe like $5 million or something like that. So the good priority is pedestrians were being prioritized in that capacity, but at the same time, Vision Zero was only $1 million, bicycle was only $2 million, it just wasn't working. We just went 3 times, and it was virtual meetings, made comments to that effect of it. Vision Zero's programming went up to about, I want to say, $14 million. Bicycle program funding went up to $8 million. And, well, now we have the pedestrian funding as well, especially with the transportation bond for it, with $50 million total going for pedestrian sidewalk. That is just 3 visits. It doesn't have to be you every single time, too. You have peers, you have friends. You can send in notes to the people when the budget hearing comes in to be like, hey, I don't want to see this much being dedicated to roadway unless it's maintenance. I want to see more funding for Vision Zero. I want to see more funding for sidewalks, for this. And the money is there. That is the biggest issue that we've had in this conversation. We always pretend the money's not there for protected bike lanes. The money's not there for sidewalks. It is. It's being misspent. And when you go to a budget hearing, probably the lamest hearing that you could possibly find, it's not a sexy thing to come out and show up for. It has a huge impact. Budgets are political. Budgets are political. And if you're having trouble finding the funding, show up to the budget hearing meetings. We'll make sure that everyone has that information when the time comes for it. But in the meantime, if you feel your street is unsafe, even those anecdotal experiences that we have, there's lots of things that you can do. And the things that you can do anonymously, the things you can do if you want to be public about it, to kind of force the issue as well. And I'll describe that just kind of looking at the public eye. So my friends and I, we run the Charlotte Urbanist Group. One of the things we did was we recognized that the city has a lack of benches at bus stops. We started to install benches at bus stops just because we noticed that, okay, it's going to be really expensive to install all of these for the city. This is a small level change that you can make, so let's go ahead and make it. North Carolina DOT had an issue with us installing a bench at one of the bus stops. What happened was, we had a whole conversation with them about it. They said, it's in the clear zone. We're like, well, the sidewalk's in the clear zone, as is the bus stop. So you're telling us that you're okay with a pedestrian being here, but not sitting here in the event that there's a car crash. And they're like, well, no, that's not what we're saying. Okay, well, it's kind of interesting that you're saying that. They're like, well, it's not tailored, it's not anchored down. They're like, well, it is. It's anchored down to the sign that you put. So if there's a collision, it will break away as you're requesting. Like, okay, well, we just don't want it there. You know, it's a potential hazard. So I'm like, all right, well, you know, fair point, but let's have this conversation while I have your attention. What is your priority here with this? And they're like, well, you know, like, we just want people to be safe. I was like, okay, so if safety is your main priority, we've noticed that there's been at least 4 or 5 pedestrian fatalities at this intersection where the bus stop is. What have you done to prevent that? Are you going to install lighting? Are you going to raise the sidewalk or the crosswalk for that? And they're like, no, we can't. That will slow vehicles down. And that's where you kind of have that moment. You have to really make sure that you question the values that are coming into place for it. Because they're saying, my number one value is safety. But when you ask them, okay, well, we want you to elevate safety in this capacity, why aren't you doing that? They're like, well, we have through traffic that we have to worry about. It's like, okay, so your value isn't safety, it's through traffic. And that really starts to kind of cause a question for it as well. Puts egg on the face of the department, really causes them to kind of reevaluate what they're doing as well. And when you make them state out loud, yeah, we know safety is the number one priority, but in actuality, it's like 1.5, 2, maybe 3 or 4 or 5. Definitely have an issue with that. That's if you're public with these items. So if you, for instance, Jacob here as well over there, he did a fantastic exercise. So we are unfortunately all aware that there was a person hit, not killed, thank God, in South End on one of the crosswalks that leads into the rail trail. It's an area that's been highly frequented. A lot of people will anecdotally say, hey, this is a potential hazard. If someone could be hit, killed at this point, what can we do? People have made a number of 301 requests to Charlotte DOT, as you should. The CLT Plus app is definitely a good tool. We can help you guys kind of echo and intensify those requests for safer items at those intersections if you want. And what we did, again, this is Jacob's idea, a couple of traffic cones, a couple of flowers, one sign that says, please slow down for pedestrians and have a nice day to that effect. It went from people just blowing through the crosswalk and not yielding for pedestrians from 30% roughly to 90% stopping and yielding for them when it came through. That is traffic cones. That is plastic flowers. That is something that you can easily accomplish either from scavenging roadway materials on the side of the road. Tons of traffic cones all over the city as we found out. Happy for the taking. Buying some from a local store for also a cheap price. And then going to Goodwill, whatever you want to adorn them with, and it could be something that can easily change each neighborhood. If we wanted to have something for North Davidson, that could easily be a series of like artistic collections just kind of put up on there as well. And it's just a small little change. And it's a big thing. Small changes like this, temporary items that you can work with, maintain, work around, they can have a huge impact. And if you want to do this anonymously, you can. There's nothing stopping you. What are they going to do? If they really have a big issue with it, they'll go in, remove them. Guess what? You can put it back up if you really want to. And that is oftentimes what it comes down to. You can have us help echo your voice if you want to install these things and make sure that your city and your street and your neighborhood are safer as a result. If they have an issue with it, we are more than happy to help draw up the day, being supported the cause, use it. No flag, no penalty whatsoever. We are happy to take the idol on for you as well. I think that's the biggest thing. Cities are what we make them. And if we really want them to be a safe city, it really does take a huge combination of efforts and everyone making their small little change and impact on this as well. So, that was a huge tirade. I apologize. What else do we have that we're thinking on or questions as well?
Concept of like how the built environment can affect drivers subconsciously. I think about the plaza, like before it used to be 2 lanes, right? And when you're driving down the plaza, because you have a car next to you, it felt like the lanes were narrower and I feel like you had to be more engaged. But now, the way it's set up, you have grass on one side, you have the planters, you have that buffer zone, and then you have the bike lane. I feel like, even personally, from my experience, that subconsciously lets you feel like, oh, I'm safe, right? There's nothing that's gonna come into my environment. I have found myself going down the plaza and looking down and saying, whoa, I'm going way too fast.
Yeah.
And now as I become more of a cyclist, I start to think about those things. Before I kind of didn't think about them, right? So considering the built environment, couldn't something like speed bumps be cost effective and help subconsciously? Because people might not even be willing or not willing, might not be seeking to be speeding, but maybe the built environment around them just is easing them on in that behavior. But something like speed bumps could affect them subconsciously, like you said, that sign in South End. Is that something easily that I guess we could try to push for? Because that seems a little more costly.
It is. And so, like, one of the big things is the speed bumps, they can be a little bit costly, but they are effective. I think the other item as well is that,
There is some actually speed bumps that are more like tactical urbanism where you just place them down, and they're regularly used in Europe, and the states have not really utilized those yet. And a lot of DOTs, a lot of transportation agencies tend to get really freaked out with new things, and they don't know what to do, and they have them in their policy. But a cheaper alternative, a way to actually say, hey, we can get these for a few $100 and install them very easily without actually the massive amount of cost it goes through to pour in place concrete.
I think that would work out. Yeah, that's definitely something to kind of help name. Hey, we have this really inexpensive tool. You don't have to go back to the streetscape, dig everything up, and build a small item for it. You can just have this small item that's here. Yes.
I was just gonna say, kind of going on that. I do know that I did like some video stuff when I was out doing stuff with Bill and talking, and there's so much stuff that they were dealing with. And they're not efficient to like a straight up speed bump. It's like they basically say like, well, it was that, like if you have like emergency vehicles or something going through. But what I have seen is that sort of similar, same type of thing that you're talking about. And similar to what you were saying with the raised crosswalks, that there are some situations where you have like effectively, I think they call it like speed tables or something, where it's effectively like a long speed bump. So it's still a bus. It still slows them down, but it's like longer and flatter. So instead of being kind of like, it's like, but it's like, so not that you know that something's going on there. It's like a raised crosswalk, but it's like a longer distance. And I remember seeing it like a lot of places that were like, we can't do a speed bump, it'll like cause all the medical problems or like emergency vehicles. But a lot of them was like, well, what if you just make it flat? They were like,
No, and that's definitely another item. But there's something that you mentioned that I really want to hit, and it's really critical to this conversation as well. The majority of drivers are not inherently trying to speed. The majority of drivers do not wake up and say, you know what I really want to do? I want to hit and kill a pedestrian today. They just don't. No one wakes up wanting to get into a car crash. But again, the built environment encourages some of these behaviors. If you feel like, hey, this feels like a 45-mile-per-hour roadway, so I'm going to drive it. You're not necessarily going to always be checking the speedometer. You're not going to always be checking the sign to see what the speed limit is as well. And that kind of affects your overall driving characteristics. So the biggest thing we really want to stress is identify what the speed limit should be. And you can change the sign to that, but changing the sign alone is not going to cut it. That usually results in a couple of items that people get frustrated on. I'm sure we've all seen the CMPD campaigns where they go out to an area, and it's like, all right, well, they camp out there and they get like 30 tickets for speeding. They're like, all right, well, on a decently designed roadway, they just wouldn't speed at all. That's a big thing. You set it for a certain speed limit, you make sure that the conditions encourage that speed, nothing more. Certainly go for less if you really want to, and then you usually have the whole situation taken care of. And again, that's something that we really need to stress. So the Vision Zero program, they understand that these items work. They will post about some of the programs where they've done a street dive and they've seen the collisions have gone slightly up, fatalities drop down dramatically, deaths drop down dramatically. Same for injuries as well. I'm okay with a couple fender benders, not okay with more people being in the hospital. But again, they're competing with other forces inside their own department and with external departments that are trying to value the through capacity vehicles. And this is something that talking to your city council members about, talking to Charlotte DOT engineers about. If you see a project for a road widening, something like that, get that person's email. Send them an email talking about, hey, this isn't really what I want. I understand the design's not in place. There's a lot of items that we really need to consider in this regards. We need this to be changed for this other item. Because remember, our priority should be safety. Not through capacity for cars, but safety number one. So again, talking to city council members, it's going to be a really big item to really just kind of hone in. Does anyone have a city council member, Bokari? That's a conversation you're going to need to keep having with them though. And again, so I can be pretty toxic online, but the biggest thing I really want to stress is, if you're in the city of Charlotte, as a city council member, you got to make bread with them. You need to talk to them and have those conversations because again, they're your neighbor, they're going to be the most immediate effective change leaders. If it's one city council member saying, hey, Charlotte DOT, like, what's going on? I don't really like care for these policies that you guys are enacting. No one cares. If it's 6, all right, well, it's kind of a big deal. It certainly affects some deployment. And the other item as well is that you need that external pressure to really kind of help implement these changes. There's internal people already within these organizations that agree with what we're talking about, that really value the safety of people, that really want to make sure that everyone can get home safely when they're transporting themselves or their families to wherever they need to go. But they need all sorts of factors kind of motivated for it as well.
Have you had any interaction with the city council?
Yes, I have. So I interact pretty frequently with Council Member Marjorie Molina. Definitely love her to death. She also values pedestrian safety and transportation and cycling as well. Braxton Winston, council member, wonderful, definitely, or I guess I should say Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Braxton Winston is definitely solid. Councilmember Dimple Ashmera, definitely a solid advocate for this item as well. Luana Mayfield, I believe, is also concerned about pedestrian safety and these other items. I haven't seen her vote on anything in that regards about it though. The others, they can kind of hit or miss. I do know that Councilmember Ed Driggs, he does take these items into consideration. It's just kind of a bit more trying to respond to what his constituents are asking for. And so, if he feels like you can't necessarily get public transportation to this item, or we're locked into these agreements with the other cities that we can't really get out of, then that's kind of the reality of it. I talked to him. I was like, hey, not to be a stickler, but you know, what would happen if the Silver Line project fell through? Sorry. But what would happen if the Silver Line project fell through and we just allocated that money for other modes of transportation, like rapid bus systems, less people have to drive, better protected bike lanes throughout the city at intersections where we're experiencing these issues. The sidewalks as well, that's definitely a big item. And that's, I want to say the Silver Line is like anywhere like 240 million. Yeah.
It's like 12 billion.
12 million. Billion. That's $12 billion allocated to the entire process.
The money doesn't exist.
Yeah. But again, this is the whole item, but there's opportunity costs that kind of come out with it. So if we can't raise the funding, all right. I don't think realistically Silver Line could happen unless we have a property tax increase as well. Yeah. But again, there's something to kind of consider. If we can't do these big expensive projects, what we're left with ultimately are the less expensive ones, kind of slowly build out, and it's going to look like that. We widen the roadways, unfortunately what's going to happen, we're going to be stuck in more congestion, more people are going to get hit, killed in car crashes, and then, guess what? Those roads aren't going to maintain themselves. So you increase the maintenance obligations as well, and then we're kind of right back where we started. We don't have any funds to kind of work on these items.
So I guess in a similar vein, what is Vision Zero doing with their money? And why can't we just give it to, like, if we just take their money and put it in sidewalks and bike lanes? I don't know, the only interaction I've had with Vision Zero is a reflective armband that's not gonna do jack shit when I get hit by a car.
No. Yeah.
So why should we give them any money?
I think the biggest thing for that is that they are trying to help organize these items. And I have been a really vocal critic of it until I started talking to Angela Berry one-on-one. I have consistently made fun of the armbands. I do think it's like a little bit silly that they have that, but when you read the literature that they put out, it is definitely, okay, yeah, they get it. When you talk to the people there, they also get it as well. Again, I think the biggest thing is when you have all these different departments competing with each other, whichever one has the most funding usually tends to win out in prioritization. And so if we really want that to kind of shift from, all right, cool, like they handed us an armband and gave me a pamphlet on why I should wear this when I'm crossing the street at 6 p.m., to, oh, hey, like they did actually raise the crosswalk. They did have some lighting at these intersections where there were problems. So that's the biggest item that they're currently working on is intersection lighting, crosswalk painting as well, I believe. If you want that to start changing, the funding needs to be reallocated as well. Because again, the department head for Vision Zero at Charlotte DOT, she gets it. She understands how it should be working. But when you are competing against those other items, and they boast massively larger if they boast larger budgets than you do, you can't really have the final say. And if you really want that to change, it's got to be flipped. It absolutely has to be flipped. And again, like, I'm cautious in giving these recommendations, because I understand, all right, yeah, like, you know, we spent this much money and I get a free armband. Not really worth it. There's a lighted intersection, but people are still going to get in it. What really happened at that point? That is because, again, the funding does not dictate what the priorities are. And if you really want that to work, it's great. I'm not even asking for a tax increase. Literally just asking, reprioritize. Maintenance, safety first. New stuff, we can work on that later if we really need to. But right now, no, like our priority should be safety. Yeah, the armbands are pretty silly. You had a...
Yeah, so I know that your group does a lot of work to, like, you know, try to get the city government to sidewalks and things like that. I mean, how much is it just individual level pushing? Or, I mean, do we see, I think about all the developers that build all the apartments, and recently here at Brevard, they finally built a stoplight because so many people were pushing that that's such a dangerous intersection. And I think all the way across Parkwood, it's the same thing. You have all this development. How much, like, do we have any developers that are advocating for putting in any money for the sidewalks and that so that they're right?
So it's a bit of a complicated question. Speaking honestly, I can only answer that on what it means for bicycle infrastructure. More or less what the city will try and do is, hey, you're coming into this area, you're building up a thing, this is what we have for the street plan. Are you interested in covering the costs of it? And usually they are. That has been my experience from the transportation projects we looked at. There was one incident that was pretty notable. There's a four-way intersection that kind of has, I think it's called like an Amsterdam roundabout, where there's protected bike lanes all along the whole side of it. There's a new development on one of the corners. The city asked, would you be willing to cover your corner? It'll cost this amount, and they happily stepped up for it as well. I think the other item is that they're usually down to do it. I think the biggest item though is that I have talked to someone in the North Davidson neighborhood that mentioned that there was one development that they didn't want to install a stop line or a stop light. The city said that, hey, we're estimating this amount of traffic. They hired their own person to say, hey, actually it's going to be lesser, so we don't have to install this. So it really depends on the development that you're working with. And so, again, I think it's the biggest thing. We are a fairly large city. I want to say last time I checked, we're the 15th largest city in the United States of America. If we want to be really serious about that status, we should not be afraid to make these asks as a city for developments when they come here. It's totally fine. You know, if we can handle it if one person decides not to come, but there's always going to be 5 or 6 more willing to take their place. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Try to think. Yes.
I'm just going to stand up so I can speak louder. I was wondering how people found out about this. So, we found out from Reddit. How about Twitter? I don't know where else do you
Meetup?
Okay, that's awesome. Instagram. So like but I'm not getting like an overwhelming one place. So, and my next question, and I don't mean to put people on the spot, how many people know who their city council rep is for their district? How many people know when city council meets? How many people have ever sent an email or called their city council member? So what I'm wondering is if there's lots of ways to make change, and I love protests and direct action, but ultimately political influence is important. It's a minimum. And so I'm wondering if there's a way that we can make it easier for people to give public input instead of the same people that are super involved. We get more people because, like, Tariq doesn't care if one person, one person is important, but like if only one person says sidewalks and bike lanes are important, like the rest of those people don't tell him anything. So if we have more people speaking, and so I'm wondering if like I made a list of all the opportunities for public input in Charlotte, like on a regular basis. There's the Bike Advisory Committee. I'm the chair of the Transportation Services Advisory. We tell CATS about what bus riders need. There's also a budget group for CATS. There's the Metropolitan Transit Commission, which is all the towns in Mecklenburg County, they oversee CATS. There's City Council, there's each of their committees, there's the Budget Committee, there's the Board of County Commissioners and their committees, there's NCDOT as a district office, there's Raleigh, there's the state legislature, and NCDOT headquarters. I don't know if CDOT has public meetings. Almost all of these have an opportunity for public input. And I'm wondering if to put them all in one place, and I know this is like a lot of work, but like a calendar, like a shared Google calendar, or like a weekly email, or a pinned tweet of like, here's how you can speak up this week. And then like added bonus would be for whoever organizes this. I realize I'm kind of putting my hand up by bringing this up, but added bonus would be, here's what's on the agenda for each of these items, and here's some talking points you could bring. That would be like an immense amount of work. But I'm just wondering if that would be useful. I mean, I think it would be. But where on, I don't know, we can talk about where to put this.
I think usually what we do when we have these items, what's that?
Do you guys have a website?
We do actually. Jacob, he has the website set up for that as well. So I'll point.
Just be able to enter the calendar right on there.
on it.
Yeah.
And that way, whoever's then an admin, you can sign up for. Well, I don't know. I haven't visited your website.
But I mean,
Yeah.
on a Google Calendar.
You should be able to just have a link below the calendar that says, or click on the event and say add your calendar. So you can then.
But like people won't go to that website. You know, people don't go. You have to have it sent to people.
Oh, right. You have to continue to do the same massive amounts of data situations.
I mean, it's a practical problem we can work out, but I feel like that's, I don't know. I know like Rex and Winston posted on Twitter, like build a political constituency for safe streets.
Yeah.
This is how we do that.
This is kind of what that looks
Do
like.
you guys also have a local YIMBY group?
A what?
YIMBY, yes, in my neighborhood.
Yes, Jamil Khan, so I'm peers with him. He's a really phenomenal person. He runs the Charlotte YIMBY group on Facebook. Usually what happens is, I mean, there's a large swath of people and large like kind of items as well. Jacob and I will usually work to kind of make sure we hit all the benchmarks in terms of like where we're posting stuff. So we have the Instagram, we have the Twitter, we have the Meetup, we have the Facebook, we have the Reddit, subreddit, and our own personal account that we have for it as well. You should have heard of this. Oh, are we working on TikToks now?
We have one, we don't really use it much.
Yeah.
We have
This will probably be the first video uploaded to the Charlotte Urban's YouTube channel as well. So, yeah, congrats everyone for being #1 at this point in attendance. And so again, like there's lots of things that we're trying to do, but we do try and make sure when we put something, it gets spread out to all the social media channels as well. I think probably the major thing though that we're working on is, I would like to do that. I do think that there's a couple organizations that do that to a small extent. Sustain Charlotte will occasionally have email campaigns. They'll occasionally, you know, like, oh hey, like Mecklenburg County's Board of County Commissioners is meeting at this particular point. You know, come weigh in. It works, but I think definitely, like, especially honing in on the city council stuff with the agenda items that are relevant. There's been so many times that I wanted to be able to go. But, you know, daughter was sick. That was probably, like, my favorite one of when we got COVID, like, 10 minutes before I was supposed to step into a city council meeting. Like, all right, well, I can't. Got to back out on that one. But there's always tons of people that are more than happy to kind of speak up on these items. I do think you bring up something really important, though, is that you do need a political committee to kind of talk about these things and be there and be present and more or less lobby as a citizen about these items just as much as you will need the direct action protests. So we'll get a list of all those items, especially any vacancies available. Because I do know the BAC has one vacancy. I don't know if they voted on it yet. I don't know if TSAC has one. Okay.
But we're working on, we'll tweet out, especially here in the towns, which I'm not sure how many people here in the towns, like not Charlotte itself, but we have 1 million openings. So, yeah, I mean, I think I might make a Google Calendar.
Okay.
Just to start, because I think the other thing with public comment is like, I think people think they need to have like some brilliant point or a fancy speech. No, you can just take your 3 minutes and say like, I think we need more sidewalks and bike lanes and better public transit or whatever it is. Just be a voice. Like nobody ever speaks at our meetings. We rarely get public comment, and it just makes me sad because like here's your microphone and nobody takes it. So you can just go give them your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it matters too. Yes.
And maybe part of that could be what Laura was saying earlier about, like, maybe if it's in the Discord or whatever, you preload like data that the city has collected on whatever issue we're talking about. So even if you're handing off, you know, gimmies to someone for a speech, it can be like, oh yeah, by the way, this was like one of the worst intersections for fatalities. So that would make it a whole lot easier. I know,
Yeah,
like,
no, they have
a lot of times
fully
they're just pulling data out of my
integrated
ass.
online for all of this.
Yeah. I will say again, the unfortunate thing though is that the city doesn't move as fast as it should unless a tragedy happens. And you know, once it happens, then the usual playbook comes out. All right, we're going to mourn for them. We're going to install a memorial. We're going to have a signature, a petition set that we're going to try and get as many signatures as possible. We're going to do a social media campaign to try and push the city to take action on it. And it, you know, it works, but again, I think the most important part is that someone had to die for that to happen. And I don't want that to keep happening. And so, again, the biggest thing is, you know, whatever you give a voice to, that's what's going to get the most attention, get the most effort put onto it. And so that looks forming the committees that we have as well. That's something I noticed being on the Bicycle Advisory Committee in my current capacity is, all right, you know, there's parts of East Charlotte that they have a projected bike lane that I'm like, why is this here? This makes no sense. but no one that was on the VAC lived in East Charlotte was traveling on those intersections, so they're just like, yeah, that looks good. You know, we'll make it work. And like, all right, well, if no one speaks up, how are they going to know that this doesn't really work for people living there? And again, that's something that we really need to be conscious about as well. And the other thing too is that I really want to stress this: like, don't just advocate for your own neighborhood. Be careful to advocate for other neighborhoods as well. West Charlotte also experiences a high rash of fatalities. And again, the biggest thing is that it's underrepresented. They have their own neighborhood communities, their own groups, their own nonprofits, but you know, every time you see their voice, especially when they're asking for these improvements, help amplify that. Be there for them. Help them out if any possible. So. Anyone else have anything? Yes.
Yeah, so you were like saying, you know, it takes a tragedy to get something to happen. One thing that I've really noticed, like when I email like the DOT or do the CLT Plus app, if you just say the words, "this is going to get someone hurt," they will almost immediately act on that. Like pretty much every time that I find something wrong now, I just put in there like, "this is going to get someone killed" or "this is going to get someone hurt," and I'm getting like so many more responses than I was before, because apparently if someone does get hurt or killed, their attorneys can use your comments against the DOT or against whoever it is, and so like putting that in there is a way to get them to act a lot faster.
That's a good tip. So you guys heard that right. If you were trying to use the CLT Plus app or the 311 app, I think they're the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah, they're the same thing. If you're concerned about an intersection, just using the phrase "this is going to get someone killed or hurt," that apparently places Charlotte DOT in a very tricky legal situation, and it sort of compels them to act. One thing that we also will try and do is what we call 311 bombing. So you tell us, hey, there's an intersection here at this point. Here's the issue I have with it. Really want it to get fixed. Okay, no, that's great. Tell us about it. Submit your 311 thing. Let us know what the details look like. We piggyback on them. And it's no longer one person complaining about it. It's 30. And that's like hold up. All right, yeah, maybe we can get to this at some point. But we'll try and figure that out too. So that's something, a tactic you can use to kind of help orient a little bit of more change for it as well. So using the policy items and having your peers around you help out with it. We're always happy to do that. Anytime that you've posted something, and like, yeah, this kind of sucks. I don't really want to deal with this anymore. Again, we piggyback on it, and it's no longer just one report, 2 reports. It's a lot of reports that kind of come into it as well. And again, we're always happy to amplify your voice in any capacity to make sure that you get the safety improvements that you want and need throughout the city.
I think the other problem is it's not necessarily that people. I'm trying to use a couple of examples. For instance, right over here with the new light over here. Do you know Dave Gusler? Anybody know Dave Gusler, the president of Mid-City Collective for soccer? Anybody know? All right, he was the one who was complaining about there not being, from what I saw, I'm in one of the soccer groups. He was the one who was complaining about there not being a light here, and the next day there's a light here. Do you know where the you know where Sailboat Bay is? The apartment complex?
Where?
Right, Sailboat Bay on Almaro
Road?
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost lived there. I live off Almaro.
That light is out right now.
Yeah.
Well, I work with the immigrant community here in town. That light is out. It's been out for 3 or 4 days. There are people right now trying to progress across the street, across Almaro Road.
That's a 5-lane roadway too.
And so, and I'm going to talk to you later about talking to people about it. I've talked to Dimple about it. I know Dimple personally. It's not necessarily. I see a lot of the problem is it's who is. It's not who's affected. It's who's being affected. Like for instance, there was I don't know if you about a year ago there was an Afghan woman and her fruitful friend who were killed on Paris by a drone strike.
Yeah,
Nothing happened. Nothing happened.
I remember that one.
That was like a year ago. I work with the Afghan community here. Like nothing ever happened. The community is very small, and so they're kind of insulated within each other themselves. But externally, nothing ever. Like, how come nothing happened? Like, this is a woman who just came here, escaping Afghanistan, and nothing ever happened. There's so many things that are happening in town. Like, this is great right here. But what about East Charlotte? What about the people who are on the fringes? I'm always fighting for the people who are on the fringes, because those are the people who I see the most.
No, and I agree with you. So I'm on the Charlotte East committee. Before we keep going, I really want to stress pieces. All my personal opinion is not representative of any of the organizations I work with. So, that's my little little lawyer footnote on that point for it. But again, I'm on the Charlotte East Transportation Committee. I'm also now on the board of directors for Charlotte East. I definitely advocate for Charlotte East as well, especially Far East. I live off of Lawyers Road. There is no sidewalk whatsoever. Yeah, it's awful. And if you try and bike the Mint Hill, that sucks. If you try and walk to the food line to get the Mint Hill, that sucks because you're just walking in the mud. It's not good. Yeah, and it's just not a good intersection as well. So I definitely really want to stress that, you know, there are organizations that are fighting and advocating for this, but unfortunately, they're usually communities of color that get left behind, especially the refugee example that you gave as well. I remember when she got hit and killed. It was on W.T. Harris Boulevard, was it not? East W.T. Harris Boulevard. Yeah, not a good intersection. It's on the high injury network. People know that should be prioritized, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, it's just not happening currently at the moment. And again, I think the biggest thing is also kind of draw the other factors. When we look at these safety items, you know, there's usually this kind of underlying assumption that, all right, well, they did this, you know, bike lanes are for white millennial yuppies that are making like 120K plus to work at tech. And, you know, unfortunately, for the most part, when we have the infrastructure, it's like, well, yeah, it was in Uptown. Went to Plaza Midwood, North Davidson. Okay, well, these are really wealthy communities at this point, not really like stretching out to these other like underserved communities. But when we look at the statistics for it, we start to see, actually no, communities of color are affected much more dramatically, especially pedestrians, than other items as well. I want to say Native American community bears the most significant portion of fatalities. Right behind them, African American, Hispanic, and then the anonymous other, which usually tends to include Asian immigrants as well. So again, when we have this conversation, we also really need to stress racial equity issues. We need to identify the high injury networks that we're experiencing in these capacities and really work to make sure that it's not just for Plaza Midwood, and it's not just for Uptown, and it's not just for South End. It needs to be everywhere. And there's cheap, inexpensive ways of doing that. I know that we all kind of complain like, hey, a flexi-post bike lane doesn't really protect me from a hurtling car, but it helps at least calm the traffic down a little bit. It helps kind of give you a bit of barrier and space so that, all right, they know you're there, you're expecting someone to be there. It's at least a little incremental step for it as well. So thank you for that point. I think it's really important to kind of make sure we're talking about this. Let me know when we have that conversation about the Albemarle Road thing, because that one especially, there's a whole host of services that people have to cross to use them, like the laundromat, and I see people doing that all the time.
So kind of to that point, I want to talk. I want to play my density fiddle again. So like a lot of our problems in those ways come from, you know, we're so spread out, we're so sprawled that getting infrastructure like that out to all of our communities, you know, on our budget it's not impossible, but it's kind of close, you know. And so I know that this is not something that we can just, you know, push for and make it happen, but I feel like trying to get the understanding that Charlotte needs to move towards a denser future, right? Not having so many like suburbs be so close to our city, but rather having a denser city that kind of, you know, more compact, a little bit more spread out, like in the density, so everybody doesn't have to live as far away from the city, because I'm sure some people want to live out there. I'm sure others want to live in the neighborhoods like the ones that you were mentioning and just can't. And, you know, I've made it very clear, like, in the center of the city of Charlotte, we have so many parking lots that are just mostly unused all the time. And so I feel like trying to push, you know, to get the city council to get rid of those parking minimums, and trying to push the city council to, you know, allow more dense developments, allow more people to move into those areas, makes it a lot easier to get the people who want to be in an area with that infrastructure into that place, so that we don't have to try to spread the entire Mecklenburg County with just the budget that we have.
I do agree with that. There's definitely a point of advocating for housing. Yeah. Oh, yeah. More or less what Mr. Elkins said was, if you want to kind of reduce these issues, helping advocate for denser housing in areas that are popular, like Plaza Midwood, Noda, so that people can afford to live in them and not be subjected to traffic violence, and it's definitely a possibility. And you're right in that capacity. But there's also something I really want to stress, is that there are already poor and underserved areas that meet the stuff that we're looking for in the density items. I mean, Albemarle Road, is that a walkable, wonderful neighborhood to be in? I'm serious. I would probably argue, not on the surface. There's a lot of cars, a lot of high speeds as well. When you look at the metrics for what it means to be a 15-minute city, is everything within 15 minutes? Do you have a transit stop within 15 minutes? Can you do most of your stuff within a 15-minute walk of it? A pretty significant portion of Albemarle Road does meet that. There's a lot of, I don't want to say low-end apartments, but affordable apartments that people can get into that make it so that, okay, cool, like I can live here, do these things. And it's fairly comfortable unless they have to cross a 4-lane roadway. And again, that's something we really need to recognize. We need to kind of look at the data and figure out what are the priorities that we have for this. Does this meet the 50-minute item? We're not paying attention to how much wealth is this we're bringing in, but does it meet the 50-minute requirement that we can build upon success-wise? And then you do that incrementally. That's one of the biggest reasons why I was such a huge advocate and fan of the Central Avenue bus lane, because that was primarily servicing a very diverse community, and oftentimes a very poor community. It was a phenomenal improvement as well. I really want to stress that. So these are some of the items that we do. In a transportation safety item as well, if you were a cyclist or a pedestrian on Central Avenue when they had a dedicated bus lane, you were only having to look out for one bus. That's a dedicated professional driver. That is not the rows of cars that would be behind them. Occasionally someone would turn. You'd be cycling, you see this person making the signal all the way from the leftmost lane. Okay, people were trying to react to that as well. It was a huge thing for it, and that was a low-cost improvement that we could have worked on as well. Literally just paint and enforcement. That's all it took. And that's something that we really need to keep in mind. What are the best bang for our buck situations in terms of getting better transportation and safety out of it? Because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but how many people have died riding the bus last year? I think we had, the driver that got shot. I think there was one person that got hit by a bus.
I don't think it's a cat's bus.
Okay. Well, that's certainly item, but it's 2 fatalities for an entire year. How many fatalities did we have? How many car crashes did we have last year?
More than 2.
Yeah, I mean, easily more than 2. We don't think of examples. Yeah, I want to say Ryan Picken recently with Queen City Nerve did a whole report on this. He's been doing data analysis on this. I want to say there were 63 fatalities in Charlotte last year from car crashes. Yeah, and it's just like, okay, well, look at the mode of transportation, safest one, it's clearly not the automobile. That's something to kind of consider. Are we heading out? Okay. I just wanted to give you my number for stepping out for that, so. What else do we got, guys? What's on our mind? Yeah.
For Vision Zero, is there a city you think we could look to that's similar size of Charlotte that's doing things right, that you think that we could probably use it as an example?
I think Jersey City and I don't know.
You said Jersey City and...
Jersey City is like, I saw headlines, I didn't read the whole article, but they're like actually approaching Vision Zero. Like, they've actually reduced traffic fatalities. And I didn't read, obviously that's super dense, but like they seem to be actually walking the walk. Yeah, surprisingly.
Yeah.
But it's also best to get a variety of cities so that you can pull things based on more evidence-based design, what's needed here. So that way you can say, oh, well, they're doing this right, but that doesn't really apply to us. But this group's doing this right, that applies more in this instance. So getting a wide variety of precedents.
I do know that the strategic mobility plan does have a list of peer cities that we compare ourselves to, and that's usually for stuff like, what's your transit share? How much is your income for the average citizen is going towards transportation and housing versus the other items as well. I want to say Milwaukee was one of them. I might be misquoting on that one as well. Again, I'd have to go back to it. It's been a while since the strategic mobility plan, but they have a list of peer cities that kind of roughly match the demographics of what Charlotte is experiencing. All right, we have a great downtown, a couple of core neighborhoods that work really well, and then we sprawled out for a really huge amount of time. What can we do to come back into it? They have a good comparison item for it. They usually have Vision Zero items as well to kind of see. Trying to think of any other items that immediately pop out. The city that you also mentioned, Hoboken, I want to say. Hoboken, yeah, they have reached 0 fatalities, and it's definitely achievable. But that's the really thing I really want to start. It is not a pie in the sky goal of we can just cure poverty. And it's like, all right, no, but this is actually realistic. We can do this. We know we can do this. We have data showing that we can do it. If anyone says, no, it's just not feasible. It's more. No, we can do this.
I do also just want to quickly point out that Hoboken is the densest city in the United States. Just kind of to my point.
Yeah.
So I know we talked about traffic fatalities. Is there a running, like, yearly number that the city of Charlotte keeps, or CMPD, or anybody? Because I know we track homicides, and that number is published pretty extensively. I was wondering if there's any published number.
Well, they have the data on the CMPD website. I think they categorize it in 2 or 3 different ways, but they only have the data available from the last year. I think you would probably have to like reach out if you wanted to do a cumulative analysis, but they do have data that is listed there. It's not summarized in a super brief, user-friendly way, but it is on the CMPD website.
Yeah, I do know that also Charlotte DOT will usually kind of report on it, especially pedestrian fatalities. That's something that they're tracking. They have a whole ArcGIS data set that they work with to kind of make sure, like, all right, well, this year we saw this many fatalities along this intersection. It's keeping on with the 5-year trends, and we'll kind of target that as well. Again, like, I really want to encourage you guys, you need to get to know Angela Berry. She is a phenomenal director of the Charlotte Vision Zero program. She gets it. She is usually happy to respond and help out. When I did my little petition for a lawyer's road sidewalk, she was happy to kind of help me walk through the process. And when it didn't pan out the way I wanted, it was like, hey, like, this didn't work out, but this is helping out an apartment with 4 times the population that is also on the high-entry network. We're going to get to at some point. And so it's really responsive. I really want to like send her some train stuff like that. Yes?
I was just going to note that working on plans like this in North Carolina, there are a couple different, like you said, they're not necessarily up to date. Some of them are like a few years back. But like NCDOT actually has a couple of different like shape files that they put out that effectively will say like by intersection, like almost every major like NCDOT intersection, not necessarily all the small city or stuff, but you can basically look at like the state and it will have like at this intersection, there between this year and this year, there were this many fatalities, this many of them were fatal, this many crashes that were actually reported at least. This many were fatal, this many were pedestrians, this many involved bicyclists, this was, and there's actually that data's out there, and there's also another one that basically just says, like, that one's like by location, it would do like a number. And then there's another one that just kind of does, I think by number or something like that. I forget, or it might be, I think one is by location, and one just shows every single individual person. So there's like data that gets put out. It's just a matter of the fact that it's usually lagging by a couple of years, because sort of like, this is the data, but there's a couple of years of like processing, and then like you get sort of like 2017 to 2020 or something, comes down to 2022 or something like that. So it's still helpful information, and I think a lot of times when we're working on a major plan like all of that, and we're looking at the high-entry network, that's what stuff we're looking at. But where actually are the testing countries that we've seen, where are some of these networks, and kind of laying it out for some of the other things, the demographic data and stuff.
Yeah.
On the Vision Zero, it has actually highlighted a map of the red areas, the orange areas, the yellow areas, and if you click on it, it says 4 deaths on this road, and it even says like by bike or by motorist.
Yeah, they've got it all. They know where the issues are, and that's the biggest thing is making sure, like, all right, well, the funding is not there. It's unfortunately not full of priority when we're looking at design for clients. And again, it might be changing. It can always be like a fluctuating thing, but in the past, it's definitely been the case that a lot of departments have had. Like, all right, well, our priority is through traffic. We can't do this because of the effect on the vehicles. And again, it's the competing values thing. One thing I really want to stress, and I did bring this for a specific reason, not just to prop up a little cardboard sign. So this is a phenomenal resource. It is Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Charles Marohn. Mr. Marohn's background was he used to be a transportation engineer in Minnesota. So kind of a far stretch from here. But he organized a nonprofit when he started realizing, like, hey, like, the math for these things isn't really adding up. I think we might end up bankrupting the city after these old things. That was his first book, The Strong Towns One, which discusses the exciting and thrilling topic of municipal finance. It is actually good. I would recommend it. But this one, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, does a huge item of talking about what the priorities are when engineers design roads. what their usual items, tactics, conversation moments are when they do these moments, what the value judgment is, and the fact that the value judgment doesn't really line up with what they have. Help me kind of peel back the layers of what is an engineer's mindset. How do they think about these problems? Where are the missteps? Where's the lack of critical thinking about looking at their own profession, and how to challenge that as well? You can get it for free at our local library system. If you have the Hoopla app, guess what? You can also download it as an audiobook so you don't have to actually sit and read it. Great stuff. And again, I'm always going to recommend that as well. So we'll kind of have a link for this as well for anyone that bothered to attend today. It's a really good resource.
One thought on your question about what are some things that, like, what are some other cities we could look to? So I just retweeted an article about in Indianapolis, when they have a crash investigation, now the police also incorporate suggestions about did the road design contribute to this crash. I don't know enough about how our police work. I'll just say that. But I don't think that they're going out and saying like, well, this bike lane was poorly designed. They're just saying like, oh, it was an accident. It couldn't have been prevented. You know, I mean, they even said when that woman was killed on the plaza, the first thing they said was it was a true accident. And I was like, what does that mean? Really? I don't believe that. I did read the reconstruction. It was a little more gray, but the fact that they're police now, as part of the investigation, we talk about did the road design contribute to this? That's something that would be great for someone to look into, and like that would be something we could advocate for. I also, it's not quite on point, but I do competitive intelligence for work, so I'm always looking at like how do other people do it. This isn't exactly the same, but I have like a pinned tweet on my Twitter, whatever, more about mode share, like how are other cities getting people out of their cars to commute by walking, biking, and transit, like specific little things, like turning parking spaces into bike parking, or turning unused storefronts into bike parking, or like a million different things. So I feel like it's not all about safety, but you can do a similar thing where you just grab, or like Carmel, Indiana, another Indiana. I think they've done like, I don't know, roundabouts everywhere. And I'm wondering now if their city parking has like some magic sauce that like.
So I'm gonna say don't look at that one because there was a lawsuit. So look at the ones in Kansas City. But Carmel's did interesting things, and they actually did like strategic studies on where your view shed needs to be, because a lot of pushback on roundabouts is you can't have anything in the middle of a roundabout. Well, the car's never supposed to be actually looking the direction that way anyway. They're supposed to be looking in those other directions because you're not going like a direct intersection. So there was an interesting thing about how people were like, oh, the view shed was wrong, that's why there was an accident. But they still have it.
I mean, I feel like these examples that when you find them, like I've been keeping track of the mode share ones, and one of these days I'm going to write it up and send it to Hannah with the works on the bike stuff for the city, my manifesto about getting people out of cars. But similarly, these would be all talking points for sharing. I mean, not all of them maybe at the same time, but like find one example, find two examples, and that's what you share with your city council person. That's what you bring up in public comment at a meeting. Like find these examples where you see them, and those are specific things. And then you put it to them and say, why can't we do this? Like,
Indiana doesn't.
Right, I mean, give me a reason why we can't do this, and then they have to defend why they're not doing this thing that saves lives.
I was feeling that way when you were talking about like tornadoes. Like freaking Raleigh did it. Like you have no idea.
Went to Kansas.
Yeah, that's definitely going to kind of pressure, like, hey, like, you know, these growing cities, pure cities, like, they fluctuate. If you moved here because you have like, a remote job, and you're like, Charlotte's going to be kind of slow on this. I think we'll go move out to Milwaukee. You do it. It's definitely like a factor in it, too. And if, like, you want to keep being a strong city and grow, like we have the aspirations to do, guess what? You're going to have to pony up some of the legislation to kind of match those aspirations as well. So, yes?
Is there any talk about bringing back the red light cameras?
I have seen that proposed. Yeah, I've seen that proposed. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so not allowed to pay for itself. The money has to go to education. Any proceeds from a red light camera system have to go to the education.
By state law.
We can use that.
Yeah, I know. I know CMS is burning for money, so. I mean, that's like a small thing that we can advocate for, though, as a community. Is definitely like make that a talking point and an item to kind of bring forth to city council. Hey, we want this back. We don't feel it's, you know, out of poor judgment. We can do this. Please make this happen. If I leave any other items as well, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a great book.
Yeah. If you guys want to take it home with you, go ahead. I'm sure we'll cross paths one day again. So.
He's planning on 5 foot series.
All right. So, kind of feel like we're kind of wandering a bit right now. Does anyone else have any other thoughts, questions, ideas? What do we got?
I think try to open up for just general discussion among people.
Yeah, well, okay. That sounds like what we're doing. It's general discussion. What do you guys think about what we talked about today? What are some things that kind of resonated with you? Some things you wish had been said instead? What are some things that, you know, yeah, I think this is feasible, or I would need a bit of help to do this as a community member? And I'm going to be here until about yeah.
I mean, a thought just my first time attending one of these meetings. But first is like, thank you for starting to create a platform for people to sit and talk and just listen to each other. I even heard some things that like sparked ideas because you're listening to different perspectives, right? Connecting a couple dots, like something she said and something she said, is like data. Do we have data on like cycling density in Charlotte? And then what the other lady there mentioned is, hey, we have open platforms, the mic is there, and the public is not showing up to mention what they're saying, right? If we start to try to connect some dots, if we get some data, make a little deck, and show up to the mic to just say, guys, on behalf of cyclists, this is kind of what the future looks like, right? It can start to change things, and it is about connecting people and starting to connect ideas. So one idea like that just popped up. I don't know exactly what the answers are, but there are ways if you start to think about it to try to get data. For instance, like, you know, the Fixed Federation that you partner with to do the critical mass rights. One of our buddies in that club is a web developer. If you go on to fixedfederation.com right now, that website is a heat map of, in Charlotte, all the members of the club, everywhere we rode last year. He developed a custom line of code where we all linked our Strava accounts and it aggregated all the data of where we rode that year and created a giant heat map of what the club did that year. That data is in Strava. We're all riding around and logging our rides. So it's like, could Strava put out an anonymous aggregated report for cities that say, hey, here's how many rides happened in the city this year. Here's the top 10 intersections where cyclists rode. Because there's so many people riding bikes. The numbers are probably insane.
Yeah.
How can we figure out the ways to like mine those numbers, right? People have different networks and skill sets, so if you start to connect people, you can start to get ideas generated and then say, hey, here are the dates, here's a Google Calendar, let's all show up, a group of us, and let's put the data in front of people. So this is an important first step of bringing people together and starting to have conversations and spark possible ideas. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure. And again, I really want to stress, this isn't just me. It's something that the community has kind of been wanting for a while. I just happened to kind of stumble into it by accident. Jacob, who's the co-founder as well, so all praise to him. He's definitely been doing a phenomenal job of helping out, because I know that we oftentimes have conflicting items that, hey, my kid's sick, or my wife needs this, all sorts of stuff, and we both kind of have to step in. So yeah. Definitely a big round of applause for Jacob as well, I would say.
So to your point, Strava actually does have that resource. So cities can buy it from them, where it gives them anonymous data of where all the cyclists are. The biggest problem with that is that a certain demographic uses Strava more than others, through cyclists, road cyclists.
Yeah.
So they have that issue, but it does exist out there. So it's a great idea to use that, because they have very fine-grained data on that stuff.
And we can find what are anyone online, are there any organizations that are aggregating cycling data? And then some of us can take it, make a little deck, and let's go put it in front of city council members. Let's keep bringing up the point. Guys, this is the metrics, this is the data. There is a very active cycling community in Charlotte. So how do we keep reminding them of that? Keep reminding them that that makes the city more advantageous. People do want to move here because of having access to those things,
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I really want to stress, whatever skill set you have that you want to bring to advocacy, or just kind of make your neighborhood a better place, do that. But also, the thing I always stress about advocacy is that You don't have to be handsome or beautiful. You don't really have to be all that smart either. You definitely don't have to be funny, as I've found with some of the failed jokes I've told today. You just have to show up and speak. Like, that is literally like the bare minimum of like, hey, like, I want to make my community a better place. I recognize there's a need. I'm going to show up and talk about it. That's it. That's like half the battle. In all honesty, if you have skill sets, use them. You don't, that's great. You know, just show up. Really, just show up. Be there for things. We're nearing the kind of conclusion point, and I wanted to make sure we have a little bit of time to kind of, hey, we'll give you your number, help out with this thing, but I also want to stress, we do have a Discord group chat. We only invite people into it that have attended the personal meetings. It's kind of really like filter the whole thing, but you know, myself, I have the invite link for it. Jacob does, as does Rye, you do as well. So if you want to keep participating in this, but you find it a bit difficult to show up to the public meetings, that's fine. We get it. We're always happy to work with you. We'll give you a personal number, Discord link, whatever you need to stay connected and make sure that you're plugged in for this kind of stuff. So
yeah, so see any of us afterwards, and we'll get you a link to that Discord if you're not already in it. It's our best way to stay connected. And like you were saying earlier, I think what we really want to do is keep pushing towards better organizing around public comment and getting like involved in the public policy process. So that's kind of one of our goals for this year is how can we like get ourselves organized around showing up to this stuff. And that's going to be through the Discord and through Google Calendar and that kind of stuff. So I want to keep on that in the coming months and get on that.
Yeah. All right. So that's all I got for today, guys.